Have you ever wondered why there are people whose mere silence can change the rhythm of an entire room? Why are there moments when you haven't said a single word, yet the person across from you suddenly becomes uneasy, starts talking more than necessary, and reveals the very things they were trying to hide? Nietzsche understood this long ago. True power does not lie in speech. True power lies in your ability to force others to confront themselves while you remain silent. Perhaps you once believed that to gain the upper hand, you had to speak better, argue faster, or be sharper than others. But Nietzsche would stop you and ask, if words are merely a way for people to cover their fear, why are you fighting on a battlefield that already belongs to them? On a deeper level, he wants you to see a cold truth. The person who is not ruled by noise always sees through the one who creates it. And this is why you should stay. This video does not teach you how to manipulate anyone. It shows you the art of rising above every confrontation without saying a word. From the illusion of speech, to the mechanisms that force people to react, to the art of observation, deliberate silence, and reclaiming power, each part will pull you out of herd psychology and bring you closer to Nietzschean self-mastery. Do not skip any part, because when you understand how silence becomes the sharpest weapon, you will not only outsmart others, you will become someone no one can control. Number 1. The illusion of speech and the collapse of the talker. Have you ever noticed why, in arguments, the people who talk the most always believe they are winning? They dominate volume, speed, and space. They believe that speaking more means being strong, and that silence means weakness. But if you stop and observe, you will see what Nietzsche saw long ago. The more people talk, the more they expose their fear. Words become a cloak used to hide inner loss of control. And when self-control disappears, power disappears with it. There is a type of person you encounter everywhere in life, someone who must speak constantly to ensure they are right. In meetings, they interrupt to assert status. In conflict, they speak rapidly, as if 1 second of silence would mean they lose. In personal life, they overshare endlessly just to fill an uncomfortable void they themselves are afraid to face. Nietzsche would call them souls who cannot endure silence, because silence forces them to look at themselves. He once said, "Silence is worse. All truths that are kept silent become poisonous." Not because truth itself is toxic, but because people fear confronting the truth within themselves so deeply that they use words to cover it. You can verify this with a very ordinary example. You argue with a hot-tempered person. They talk non-stop, throwing every argument they have. But the moment you stop responding, everything shifts. They become awkward. They repeat themselves. They look into your eyes, searching for validation. They are no longer fighting you. They are fighting the fear inside themselves. That is the moment Nietzsche describes. The one who speaks the most is not the strongest. They are simply running from themselves. Silence is not avoidance. Silence is the refusal to step onto the stage someone else has built for you so that you react on their terms. Silence gives you the right to observe instead of react. It places you outside the game that the talker is trying to drag you into. And when you do not enter the game, power tilts toward you without you raising your voice or arguing. This is why Nietzsche saw silence as a form of advanced self-mastery, and self-mastery is always the foundation of superior intelligence. In reality, those who talk the most are often searching for control, validation, or protection for an invisible wound. A co-worker talks endlessly to prove competence, but is secretly afraid of being replaced. An ex-partner insists on having the last word because they fear being left in silence. A friend talks too much during meetings because they don't want you to see their inner insecurity. Nietzsche would tell you that their words are not wrong. They are simply evidence that something essential is missing, an inner axis. This does not mean speaking is bad. Nietzsche did not reject language. He pointed out that speech is not where power resides. Real power lies in your ability to remain calm when others lose composure, to keep your rhythm when others accelerate, to preserve inner space when others try to fill it with noise. When you choose silence at the right moment, you do not merely expose others, you force them to face themselves. And that is the foundation of this entire video: to outsmart, to see through, to take the upper position. You do not need to argue better than anyone. You only need to control yourself better than they do. You do not need words. You need presence. You need an ego strong enough to remain silent without feeling diminished. Nietzsche would say, "Victory is not in what you say. Victory is in what you are not forced to say." If you have ever found yourself dragged into unnecessary conversations, overwhelmed by loud personalities, or using words to defend instead of mastering yourself, let this part serve as a quiet reminder. You do not need to argue to be intelligent. You only need to stand firmly within yourself. And if you want to understand more deeply why people are compelled to react, why they cannot tolerate silence, and how you can step out of that psychological trap, continue to the next part. Because there, you will see the true reason why words become the place where people defeat themselves before an opponent ever does anything. Number 2. The psychological mechanism that forces people to react. You cannot understand the power of silence without first seeing a simple but ruthless truth. Most people do not speak to communicate. They speak to protect the ego. Nietzsche saw this clearly, which is why he left behind a line that still chills readers. He who cannot obey himself will be commanded. A person who cannot govern their inner world will always be governed by something else. And reaction, mistaken for strength, is where people lose self-command most completely. Reaction is a form of addiction, not addiction to words, but addiction to the feeling of control. When someone challenges you, when an opinion touches your ego, when someone looks at you silently for too long, a natural impulse arises. Respond immediately. Explain. Justify. Prove that you are fine. That impulse is precisely where power leaks out. Many confuse reaction with strength, but for Nietzsche, reaction is proof of a controlled mind, a mind that cannot tolerate emptiness, a mind that exists only when it has something to fight. And here is the deeper reason. The ego is terrified of appearing weak. That fear drives people to explain even when no one asked, to argue even when they don't want to speak too fast and too much just to feel in control. Yet paradoxically, in reacting, they lose the very thing they seek, inner sovereignty. This, Nietzsche believed, was the most dangerous weakness of all. Anyone who must react lacks the inner force to remain still. To make this clear, let me tell you a story. A friend of mine, Alex, once worked as a marketing manager. Whenever a subordinate proposed something that conflicted with his view, Alex immediately countered. He interrupted, said, "That's wrong. Let me explain. That won't work." He lived in constant defense. One day, the CEO gave him an experiment. For 1 week, Alex was not allowed to respond immediately to any proposal. He had to ask questions and remain silent for 10 seconds before replying. The results surprised him. Alex said those 10 seconds felt unbearable, like something inside my chest was about to burst. But after a week, he realized the truth. He didn't actually want to argue. He was afraid of being seen as incompetent. His reactions were not strength, but a fragile shield. This is the mechanism Nietzsche wanted you to confront. People react not because they are strong, but because their ego is too fragile to endure silence. Imagine the ego as a lake. A deep lake remains still even when a stone is thrown in. A shallow lake becomes muddy and chaotic with even a pebble. Reaction is the mud being stirred. Observation is the depth that remains untouched. Nietzsche would say, "Those who react instantly lack depth. Those who observe possess an inner axis strong enough to resist noise." But why does reaction make you lose before you even speak? Because reaction places you in a guided role. When you rush to justify, someone else controls your rhythm. When you argue angrily, someone else leads your emotions. When you speak to save face, you admit your ego depends on their gaze. This is precisely the herd morality Nietzsche criticized, living to be accepted rather than to be strong. Someone who needs to prove they are right is always in a weaker position than someone who needs to prove nothing. The silent person holds power. The reactive person gives it away. You see this in relationships. The more you demand to be understood, the lighter your presence becomes. In conflict, the one who reacts most intensely reveals the deepest fear of abandonment. In conversation, the one who insists on being right often feels empty inside. Nietzsche did not tell you to be silent to appear superior. He told you to be silent to see the real motives at play. And once you see those motives, you have outsmarted others without opening your mouth. If there has ever been a moment in your life when reacting too quickly cost you inner strength, or when silence allowed you to see someone's true nature more clearly, share that moment in the comments. You don't need eloquence, only honesty. Nietzsche always begins with truths people avoid, and your story might be where others recognize themselves. Number 3. The shift from reaction to observation, the foundation of superior intelligence. And from the moment you begin to see the invisible strings that once controlled you, borrowed morality, people-pleasing reflexes, the fear of being judged, you will notice another mechanism Nietzsche always wanted you to confront directly. Most people do not act, they only react. And precisely because they react, they are led, controlled, and manipulated without ever realizing it. But the one who knows how to observe is different. That person does not jump into the game. That person stands at the edge and sees the entire board. Try to imagine a very small but very real moment. Someone makes a remark that irritates you. You did that wrong. Normally, instinct pulls you into reaction, explaining, justifying, or pushing back to defend yourself. But if at that exact moment you stop, take a breath, and simply observe them instead of responding, you will notice something that happens almost immediately. The other person becomes uneasy. They keep talking, then talk more than necessary, then expand the issue to maintain the upper hand. The shift is unmistakable. When you stop reacting, you move from being dragged into the game to seeing the whole picture. A single pause is enough to reverse the roles. They react, and you observe. And that very moment is the foundation of superior intelligence. Not because you are smarter, but because you are standing in a position where your mind is no longer being controlled by someone else. That is the nature of reaction. It is a trap. And the nature of observation, it is power. A very simple yet razor-sharp metaphor can make this clear. Imagine you are standing on a stage, a spotlight shining directly into your face. When you react immediately, you are completely exposed. You cannot see anyone clearly, but everyone sees you clearly. But when you step half a step back into the shadows, you become the observer. You see everything, and they can no longer see you. The one in the light is exposed, the one in the dark controls. And if you want to know where this difference comes from, neuroscience offers a precise explanation. When your ego is threatened, criticized, belittled, challenged, the amygdala in the brain immediately triggers a fight or defense response. Science calls this an amygdala hijack, meaning the amygdala steals control from the rational brain, the prefrontal cortex. You are no longer choosing, you are merely reacting. But if you pause for just 3 to 5 seconds, control returns to the prefrontal cortex. There, you begin to think, analyze, see real intentions, and choose a response. Just a few seconds are enough to distinguish the triggered from the perceptive. Nietzsche did not use scientific language, but he grasped the essence long ago. The reactive person is led. The observing person is free. Because the reactive person acts from fear, while the observing person acts from awareness. Look back at your own life. You have certainly argued before and felt weaker the more you spoke. Not because you were wrong, but because you allowed the game to be defined by someone else. Nietzsche would say, arguing is entering the game, observing is rising above it. And what makes the power of observation truly dangerous is this. The observer does not threaten with words, but with stillness. That stillness forces others to hear the noise in their own minds, forces them to interpret, to expose themselves, to reveal motives, to expose weaknesses. When you remain silent at the right moment, you are not losing at all. You are opening a space in which the other person traps themselves. When you stop reacting, you begin to see yourself, the fears you habitually hide, the weak points in your ego that make you easily triggered, the places where a light touch makes you spring like a loaded coil. This is exactly why Nietzsche saw observation as the foundation of superior intelligence. The observer sees where they are weak, and from that moment on, they are no longer controlled by it. So how do you move from reaction to observation? Not through philosophy, but through very small, very practical training. The next time someone pokes your ego, try stopping for exactly 1 beat. Do not reply immediately. Do not defend. Do not justify. Do not perform. Being fine. Just stop. In that beat, you will see something most people never see. You are choosing yourself instead of letting the ego choose for you. And if you manage to do this even once, you will understand why Nietzsche saw observation as the first step to rising above all psychological games. You are not silent because you are weak, but because you are beginning to learn how not to be pulled into battles that are not yours. Number 4. Übermensch and the art of deliberate silence. So if a single pause is enough to reverse the situation, what happens when you turn silence into an art, a deliberate strategy? Nietzsche never praised weak silence, the silence of someone forced to swallow their words. What he spoke of was a completely different kind of silence. the silence of the self-sovereign, of the person who holds an inner axis, of a spirit that has moved beyond the need to be understood or to win in the moment. Nietzsche named this direction of evolution with an image, the Übermensch, the human who rises above themselves, above the herd, above unconscious reflexes, to become the master of their own inner space. For the Übermensch, silence is not emptiness, it is a tool. It is the space in which others expose themselves, the stage on which human nature is revealed without you opening your mouth. Nietzsche once wrote, "Everything the state says is a lie, and everything it has stolen." But if you replace state with herd, he is describing another reality. Every noise of the herd conceals a fear, and every hurried reaction steals your inner sovereignty. Silence, for Nietzsche, is how you prevent that herd from entering you. In the Odyssey, there is a scene with a chillingly Nietzschean spirit. When Odysseus returns to Ithaca after 20 years, his palace has been taken over by dozens of suitors. They are loud, boastful, mocking, as if volume itself creates power. Odysseus disguises himself as a beggar and remains silent. No reaction, no argument, no self-defense against humiliation. And that silence makes the entire palace uneasy. They do not know what he is thinking, who he is, or whom they have insulted. Odysseus's silence is not submission. It is the silence of someone who knows they hold the upper hand. When the truth is revealed, in only a few minutes, the loudest become the most terrified. That is Nietzsche's logic. The silent one, if they possess inner force, is always the most dangerous person in the room. So how does the Übermensch remain silent? Not by enduring, avoiding, or appearing noble, but by having moved beyond their game. When others try to drag you into their emotions, you do not react. When they want you to prove something, you do not prove it. When they demand that you say something, you choose to stand outside. And that refusal to participate causes them to lose position. For Nietzsche, a person is only truly strong when no one can force them to do anything, not even to speak. Deliberate silence produces three extremely powerful psychological effects. First is imbalance. When you do not respond, their psychological pattern breaks. Second is self-exposure. To fill the silence, they speak more than necessary. And the more they speak, the more they reveal their true motives: fear, envy, insecurity. Finally, there is inner chaos. Your stillness forces them to hear the voice in their own mind and, for the first time, to confront themselves. That is why silent people are often hated most by the weak. Silence forces them to face what they are avoiding. The Übermensch does not play low games. No need to shout to prove anything. No need to argue to win. No need to perform to be recognized. They win by position, not by volume. The Übermensch's belief is this: I do not need others' recognition to exist. And that is the highest form of freedom Nietzsche wanted you to reach. Someone who has not risen above the ego will always be pulled into reaction. But someone who stands above the ego uses silence like a sword, sharp, requiring no wild swings, only presence. The next time someone tries to provoke you into reacting, try pausing for half a beat in your mind. When they release a sarcastic or judgmental remark, instinct pulls you into the role they want you to play. But if in that very moment you ask yourself quietly, who do they want me to become in this situation? You immediately step out of the reaction trap. That question shifts you from emotion to observation. If someone says, "You're always too sensitive," You will not rush into defense because you see them trying to force you into a role. When you refuse that role, the upper hand instantly returns to you. This is the kind of mental sovereignty Nietzsche saw as the foundation of superior intelligence. No need for prolonged silence, no need to appear strong. Half a beat is enough to escape herd reflexes and become the one who leads the situation. And if all of this makes you realize how many times you reacted when you could have observed, how many times you lost position when a single pause would have been enough, I invite you to leave one word in the comments, a small but weighty oath. Write the word ascend as a reminder to yourself that from this moment on, you choose to rise, beyond old reflexes, beyond the need to be understood, beyond the herd, and closer to the spirit of sovereignty Nietzsche always spoke of. Number 5. The psychology of the other person when you remain silent. And if you have already seen how silence can make the other person expose themselves, this journey takes you further. Silence does not merely confuse them. It gives you the power to read them with such precision that they feel as if their soul is being laid bare. This is no longer a communication skill. This is the art of rising above others without saying a word, exactly as Nietzsche once implied. The one who is not ruled by noise can see through what others try to conceal. Let us begin with a frame that is very real, very ordinary. A viewer of the channel, Daniel, once shared that he was the type of person who was easily provoked. As soon as someone touched his ego, he reacted immediately, and yet he was always the one who ended up exhausted. Until one day, he tried a different strategy. At a party, someone made a half-joking, half-mocking remark. Daniel looks like someone who doesn't know how to control his life. In previous years, he would have argued. But this time, he simply looked at the person and stayed silent. No rebuttal, no smirk. And what happened next was that the other person, accustomed to others reacting, began to falter. He changed his tone, then laughed awkwardly, then started explaining himself. "That's not what I meant, I was just joking." Daniel did not say a single word, yet the other man had already lost to the shadow of himself that he could not control. That is the power of wordless observation. It forces others to defeat themselves. The harsh truth is this: not everyone is strong enough to stand in front of that silent void. Manipulators will hate you. Insecure people will feel uncomfortable around you. Those who are used to controlling others through emotion will panic when you do not react, because your reaction is the fuel they live on. A manipulator is only powerful when you are still wavering. When you stand still, they lose their source of energy. That is why silence is not merely a winning strategy. It is a mechanism for cutting off the opponent's supply of power. Nietzsche never taught you to be a gentle bystander. He taught you to become dangerous without making noise. The most dangerous person is not the one who speaks the most, but the one who does not need to spend energy to win, the one whose stillness causes others to expose themselves. You will see this even more clearly when you understand the deeper psychological mechanism. When you remain silent, the other person's brain is placed into a state of data deprivation, and that gap forces them to fill it with their own fears, memories, and insecurities. You are not making them anxious, they are making themselves anxious. And when that gap grows large enough, they begin to act not according to logic, but according to instinct. That is the moment you outsmart them without saying a word. But the pinnacle of this art does not lie in destabilizing others. The pinnacle lies in the fact that you are no longer controlled by them. You are not pulled by their emotions. You are not forced into the roles of victim, aggressor, or apologizer. You become someone who cannot be trapped. And Nietzsche would call this the quality of a sovereign spirit, someone the herd cannot manipulate. Imagine two warriors. One holds a sword, swinging wildly, striking at the air, losing strength with every blow. The other stands still, one hand resting on the hilt, simply observing. After a while, the first warrior is exhausted from fighting emptiness. The second warrior needs to draw his sword only once, and the battle ends. The second does not win by brute force. He wins by inner force. He wins by patience. He wins by refusing to be dragged into the rhythm of the weaker one. That is exactly how you outsmart anyone without saying a word. But this art is not for those who want to look dangerous. It is for those who want to master themselves. For those who know that silence is sharper than argument. For those who understand that observation is deeper than reaction. For those who recognize that inner force always defeats outer force. So how do you become such a person? Someone whose silence forces others to remeasure themselves. Begin with a very small but powerful practice. Whenever someone says something that makes you want to react immediately, treat it as an opportunity to stand at a higher position within yourself. Do not reply. Do not correct their perception. Do not defend your ego. Just observe. Observe them. Observe yourself. Observe what is being touched. Observe what is rising from within. In that moment, you are not only outsmarting them, you are transcending yourself. And Nietzsche would smile at this point because he knew anyone capable of observing instead of reacting has already stepped out of the herd. That person is no longer controlled. That person is moving closer to freedom. Number 6. Silence as an act of reclaiming power. Nietzsche once wrote, "No one can build you the bridge on which you must cross the river of life. No one can build the bridge for you to cross your own life. And therefore, power does not belong to the one who speaks the loudest. It always belongs to the one who knows when to withdraw their energy." Silence, for Nietzsche, is not emptiness. It is an act, a refusal, a strategic withdrawal from a game the other person wants you to play. And the moment you pull your energy back to your own center, the balance of power immediately tilts in your favor. You will understand this more sharply by looking at a real story from the film industry, Keanu Reeves. He is often called the quietest man in Hollywood, not because he lacks a voice, but because he understands the value of not becoming a puppet of public expectation. Years ago, during an interview where the host deliberately probed too deeply into his private life, Keanu did not react, did not explain, did not defend himself. He simply smiled and allowed the silence to stretch for a few seconds. As the host continued speaking, trying to fill the gap that Keanu refused to fill, it was the host who began to reveal insecurity, a need for control, and discomfort in front of someone who would not take the bait. And when the interview ended, what everyone could clearly see was not that Keanu had been weak, but that the silent man had completely controlled the rhythm. He withdrew his energy from the game, and the game collapsed as a result. Silence in the right place is how you reclaim power without fighting. Every time you do not react, do not justify, Do not jump into a battlefield someone else has constructed. You are pulling back the energy they need to maintain dominance. A manipulator is only strong when you are still wavering. An angry person only wins when you agree to play on their frequency. A provocateur only exists when you continue to react. When you stand still, every role they try to force onto you, victim, wrongdoer, one who must explain, disappears. Imagine a very simple image, an electrical socket with the plug pulled out. No matter how expensive or noisy the device is, it shuts off instantly. You do not need to destroy it, argue with it, or fight it. You simply remove the power source. Silence is that act of unplugging. And this is what Nietzsche wants you to confront directly. The greatest power is not what is given to you, but what you withdraw from places that do not deserve it. Many people think they are strong when they win arguments. Nietzsche says, no. You are only strong when you are no longer forced to argue, when you do not need to defend yourself against every distortion, when you do not need to correct other people's perceptions of you, when you understand a cold truth. Inner freedom matters more than external victory. Silence is the shift from being affected to being sovereign, from reaction to observation, from being dragged along to standing at your own center. And here is the sharpest point of this section. Silence is the transitional stage before power is reborn. Like withdrawing troops to reorganize, silence is not retreat, it is preparation. Preparation for a version of you that is stronger, sharper, harder to control. Nietzsche would say, silence is not the loss of a voice. It is the moment when the true voice is being reforged. To help you practice this immediately in real life, try a small but extremely powerful exercise. The next time someone says something that makes you want to react instantly, do the opposite of your instinct. Instead of rushing to explain, ask yourself 2 questions silently. What role are they trying to push me into? And, if I stay silent, who holds the power? You will see, almost immediately, the power pattern reverse. The other person starts talking more, filling the space, revealing motives, sometimes even shrinking because they no longer have the force to attack. In that moment, you have entered what Nietzsche called spiritual sovereignty. A sovereign person does not need to shout, does not need to win by logic, does not need to prove anything. They win by refusing to let anyone occupy their mind. And that is the soul of the art of outsmarting anyone without saying a word, reclaiming energy back to the center, breaking old power mechanisms, and opening the path to a new state where you are no longer someone else's reaction, but the one who shapes the space around you. Silence is the moment you begin to become yourself, not the easily triggered ego, but the ego with an axis, with weight, with sovereignty. And when you take that power back, the next part will show you this. Silence does not only reclaim power, it also recreates it, in a way that makes you someone no one can control. And if what you have just heard makes you feel slightly uncomfortable, slightly unsettled, as if something inside is shifting, press like on this video as a small signal to yourself that you have begun questioning old reflexes, old herd values that once taught you what to believe. Nietzsche would say, only ideas that disturb you are capable of freeing you. And if you are still here, it means you did not choose comfort. You chose the truth. You choose power. Number 7. Killing the silence of surrender and rebirthing the silence of power. There are two kinds of silence that exist in life, and every failure or victory begins with which one you are using. Nietzsche saw them as two completely opposite paths. One leads downward, one leads upward. The first is the silence of fear, the silence you adopt when you do not dare to speak or defend yourself. It is a shrinking silence, a surrendering silence, the silence of someone hoping to be rescued. The second is the silence of power. Silence when you do not need to prove, explain, or be respected in order to exist. It is the silence of someone who knows their own value and knows that other people's words do not define them. Nietzsche would say, "The silence of the slave must be destroyed. The silence of the warrior must be reborn. And you must kill the kind of silence that makes you smaller in order to resurrect the kind that makes you dangerous." As Nietzsche wrote, "The higher we soar, the smaller we appear to those who cannot fly." I once worked with a woman named Marissa, intelligent and capable, but always silent in a way that came from fear of making others uncomfortable. When interrupted, she stayed silent. When her ideas were taken, she stayed silent. When others spoke for her, she stayed silent. Not because she was kind, but because he was afraid. And that silence pushed her backward. One day, Marissa did not speak more. She simply changed the way she was silent. When interrupted, she stopped and looked directly at the other person. When corrected, she did not react, but did not retreat. When someone spoke for her, she maintained a slow, deliberate silence until they choked on their own words. Within weeks, the entire meeting room changed. People chose their words more carefully, became more cautious. She did not shout, did not fight. She only changed the type of silence she used. She killed the silence of surrender and rebirthed the silence of power. If you want to understand why this transformation is so powerful, science has an answer. When you remain deliberately silent, the other person's brain enters a state called a prediction gap, a lack of data that prevents the nervous system from predicting what you are thinking. Humans fear what they cannot predict. The silence of the weak invites others forward, but the silence of someone with inner force makes others step back. And that stepping back creates a position for you. The silence of surrender makes you disappear. The silence of power gives you weight. Nietzsche did not use scientific language, but he understood this essence long before science could explain it. The one who cannot tolerate your silence is the one who cannot tolerate themselves. But the most important part is not about them, it is about you. The silence of surrender says, "I hope you accept me." The silence of power says, "I do not need you to exist." One person uses silence to avoid. The other uses silence to shape the space around them. One is silent because they are weak. The other is silent because they are strong. And to outsmart anyone without saying a word, you must become the second. Ask yourself, in the way Nietzsche would ask you, to whom does your silence belong? To the free person or the subdued one? If it is the silence of the weak, others will overwrite you. If it is the silence of the strong, you will force them to remeasure themselves. So how do you rebirth the silence of power? You do not need complex exercises. You need one principle. I am not silent because I am afraid to speak. I am silent because I do not need to speak. In every confrontation, if you remain silent to avoid trouble, that is surrender. But if you remain silent because their words are not worth your energy, that is power. If you are silent to keep harmony, you erase yourself. But if you are silent because you are not begging to be understood, you are rebuilding yourself. If you are silent because you fear losing, you have already lost. But if you are silent because you choose not to play the game they set up, you have won before the battle begins. And here is the final essence Nietzsche wants you to grasp. You truly outsmart someone only when your silence forces them to confront themselves while you stand firmly within yourself. Kill the silence that makes you smaller. Rebirth the silence that makes you ungovernable. And the moment you choose the second kind of silence, you step into the world Nietzsche wanted you to reach, a world where you do not need words to have power, where you win by position rather than volume, where your presence itself is the answer. If you have come this far, you have seen what Nietzsche always wanted humanity to face. True strength lies in the person who is no longer pulled into reaction. Words are only dust covering fear. But sovereign silence, that is where essence is revealed. When you stand still within yourself, others are forced to expose themselves. Outsmarting in the Nietzschean spirit is not winning through clever tricks, but rising through character. Leaving herd psychology behind, no longer living in borrowed reflexes. Entering a state where your presence alone can shift the situation. No words, no proof required. If this message resonates with you, share it with someone who is being swept away by other people's noise. Perhaps one moment of well-placed silence can save them from a lifetime of being controlled. And if you want to go deeper into the art of self-mastery and the psychology of power in the spirit of Nietzsche, subscribe to Walk With Us. Because true power does not begin with words. It begins with silence.